I've tried to fit right in with the theme of the conference, and so the first night we talked about that in order to be light, we have to understand that God wants to be intimate. He wants to be in us, despite us, leaven and all, just as we are, and we should be motivated by that to be generous people. And then last night we talked about the hem of Jesus' garment and how if there was healing in his wings, then there's healing in yours, and how you carry the presence of God. This morning we talked about where the cross fits into history. Anytime I preach, I want Jesus to get bigger, the cross to work better, and the resurrection to be central. And tonight is no different than that. I wrestled with what to talk about tonight, but I've just got to talk about this because it's so important to the theme, and it's important to the week. And it's just so important. That is this: how do you handle regret? That to be light in your community, you have to create an environment where people can deal with their regret and know they get a fresh start. And so a true one, not lip service, not, hey, come as you are, and then when they show up, we tell them every place they need to change. The church needs to be doing all the loving, and the Spirit of God needs to be doing all the changing. And when we try to be the agents of conviction, can I just be frank with you? We suck at it, okay? We should be doing all the loving, and the Spirit of God should be doing all the changing and conviction and all of that. And so one of the ways that we have to do that is we have to deal with regret well. My goal tonight is to do four things. It is to empower you on how to handle regret, number one. Number two, and more importantly, to empower you on how to handle other people's regret. Number three, I want you to fall in love with Jesus again. And number four, I want you to understand the power of celebration. And so we're gonna talk about these things, because as soon as I say I want to talk about how to handle regret, everybody should perk up, because that's the one thing we all have in common. If you're here and you don't even know about Jesus at all, or if you're here and you've been walking with Jesus 40 years, let me tell you what brings you two into the same room and makes you the same, and that is this: all of us have regrets. I'm talking about the things in our life that we wish we had a do-over on. That I'm talking about the things in our life that we wish, that we hope to God never ends up on Facebook. That I'm talking about the things in our life that when we meet a new group of people, we wrestle with how much of our story to tell, because quite frankly, it's none of their business. But then we worry about if they find out too much about it, they'll think we're lying, but we're not lying. It's just we didn't want to retell the story that's 5 years old. I'm talking about that. How do we handle regret? Thank God we don't live in ancient Sumerian culture, just like we learned this morning. In ancient Sumerian culture, when you had regrets, they didn't know what to do, so they handed you a knife, and they said, here, you can get right with God by cutting. The problem is how much did you cut? Everybody together? Yeah, I don't know. And so the problem is that what if you did 10 cuts, but the magic number was 11 and you still didn't know? In the Middle Ages, it was the same sort of way. They found diaries of monks that prayed prayers like this: we prayed on our knees on stone floors until they bled, which leads to all kinds of questions like, why would you want to follow a God that takes pleasure in your physical pain? That is just absurd. We do something similar today. We just remove the knife. What we do is we say, you need to get right with God. You need to get up here and you need to get right with God. And so we make the upfront holy. And then of course when they get down here, they're like, what must I do? And then we make up more words that have no meaning. We're like, you need to be sorry. Which leads to all kinds of questions like, how sorry must I be? And more importantly, how long do I have to stand here until God knows I'm sorry? Then we make up more words. We say, you just need to stay till you get your breakthrough, right? And so you stay till you get your breakthrough until next week you hear the story of someone else's breakthrough, and their breakthrough sounds better than your breakthrough, which leads to the question as to whether or not you ever actually had a breakthrough. And we still wonder, have I done enough? When I looked at this, it's an age-old question. When I looked at this, what I found is the most ancient answer in the scripture is maybe still the best answer. And in Leviticus, here's what God did. God set aside one day a year, and that day was called Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. And what he did is he set aside one day a year, and this was the idea. On this day, all regrets from the whole year is going to get wiped clean. If you bring your bucket, if I use a bucket as an illustration, and we're going to fill up everybody's bucket with their regrets. So all the regrets for the whole year are going to go in this bucket, and then on this day, everybody's bucket gets empty. Everybody gets a clean slate. Everybody gets a fresh start. Everybody gets a do-over. Everybody gets a mulligan. The idea is that you can't carry this year's regrets into next year, because next year will have its own bucket of regrets. And if you don't regularly empty your bucket of regret, you'll have 2 buckets of regret. And then the third year, you'll have 3, and you have to consolidate it into a barrel. And if you do that as a lifestyle, one day you'll need a crane to pick up your life. It'll be so heavy. One of the issues that you see with Yom Kippur Is God practicing what he preaches? He asked us to forgive everybody that hurts us. What kind of God would he be if he holds things against people forever? So God once a year, even in Leviticus, set aside that day and he let everything go. I think it's one of the spiritual disciplines that doesn't get enough playtime. We talk a lot about spiritual disciplines. We talk about church and fellowship and worship and word. And we talk about these things, and amen, I am all for all of it. I am all for study. I am all for fellowship. I am all for serving. I am all for private prayer time. I am all for all those things. But one of the spiritual disciplines that just doesn't get a whole lot of playtime, which I think it should, is the spiritual discipline of regularly setting aside a time where you just let stuff go. I'm talking about regularly set aside a time, ideally every day, but most people can't do that. What I try to do is every Saturday night before I go to bed, I try to let it go. I try to be honest before God. This is where I failed this week, and I'm just going to let it go. And this is where they've hurt me this week, and I'm just going to let it go. When we regularly set aside a time where we just let it go. In Leviticus, God did this once a year. Once a year. Now, a later writer said, actually, his mercies new every morning. And then Jesus comes along and says, if you want to know what I'm really like, I forgive 70 times 7 for the same sin in the same day. So the final word of God was a whole heap of grace, 70 times 7 for the same sin in the same day. And if you can't go with Jesus, I get that. That takes a lot of faith. At least go back to forgiving yourself and others once a year, once a day. And if you can't do that, at least go back to forgiving yourself and others once a year. And if your concept of God is meaner than Leviticus, it is time for you to change. In other words, if you're holding failure against somebody past a year, your concept of God is meaner than Leviticus. If you're still bringing up someone else's regret and someone else's failure, your concept of God is meaner than Leviticus if it's over a year old. You should not, and I should not ever be bringing up people's failure past a year, past any time really, but we shouldn't be doing it past a year, because if we do that, then our concept of God is meaner than Leviticus. And here was the great thing about this day. This is the only time in the whole Bible you see this where the command was Shabbat Shabbaton, absolutely no work. In other words, when I'm going to forgive everybody's sins, no one's allowed to do anything lest anybody could make a claim that it's because of what they did that I did it. Because if people can make a claim that it's because of what I did that I forgave them, then you'll have people who think they're forgiven and then other people aren't forgiven. You'll have people who are in and other people who are out. And if Christianity ever turned into that, that would be terrible. Aren't you glad we avoided that one? Even in Leviticus, it was by grace through faith, because no one could boast, because on the day God forgave all sins, no one was allowed to do anything anyway. So what I want to do is I want to read you the account of this day with this in mind. That the gospel writer John said if everything had been written down about Jesus, the world could not contain the books. You know what that means? That means they picked and chose what they wrote. And particularly John, he uses Yom Kippur as the backdrop to define what Jesus meant to the world. And so I want to walk you through this, hopefully with the idea that Jesus gets even bigger and kinder than he's ever been in your whole life, in your mind. I hope Jesus gets huge. And at the same time, I hope we get empowered to handle our regrets. Let me show you this. This is from Leviticus. Chapter 16, this is the account of Yom Kippur. Aaron is to offer the bull for his own sin offering to make atonement for himself and his household. Then he is to take 2 goats and present them to the Lord at the entrance to the tent of meeting. He is to cast lots for the 2 goats, 1 lot for the Lord and the other for the scapegoat. So this day centered around 2 goats. 1 goat for the Lord, and the other was a goat called Azazel. It gets translated in English scapegoat, but the Hebrew word is Azazel. It's the single most important word I'm going to teach you tonight, so I want you to learn this, and with some double gusto, I want everybody to try this. Everybody say Azazel. Go. Azazel. So this day centered around 2 goats. 1 goat for the Lord, and the other goat for Azazel. Now, Azazel gets translated scapegoat. Actually, the root word Azazel means take him away. But a translator can't translate it that way because a translator's job is to make it readable. So you can't translate that in English. He is to cast lots for the 2 goats, 1 lot for the Lord and the other for the take him away. That doesn't read well. So they just translate it scapegoat. In the Afrikaans Bible, they just leave it Azazel. because there's just no Afrikaans word that encapsulates what's going on there. The idea is to take him away. The word azazel also means a weapon in the hand of the enemy. The idea is that whatever the enemy is using to beat you up, normally your own failure, we're going to remove it. We're going to take it out of his hand. Normally the enemy needs nothing more ammunition-wise than our own regrets and our own failures to beat the absolute stew out of us. And what this day was about was removing the weapon in the hand of the enemy. We're going to take it away. So this day centered around two goats. One goat for the Lord and the other for what was his name. It's really important. Everybody together. Azazel. Let's keep going. Now this just keeps going. Next slide. Aaron shall bring the goat whose lot falls to the Lord and sacrifice it for a sin offering. In other words, if you're the goat whose lot falls for the Lord, that is just going to be a bad day for you, right? But let's just be honest. If you're born a goat, that's just a bad day, period, right? But the goat chosen by Lot as the Azazel must be presented alive before the Lord to be used for making atonement by sending it away into the desert as the Azazel. So just some quick context. Next slide. So this day centered around two goats. One was the goat for the Lord, and the other was the goat for Azazel, or as that said, creche number 31. Now, some kid is the Azazel. Right? Now, Azazel means take him away, or it can mean a weapon in the hand of the enemy. If you're here and you're an X-Men fan, there's an X-Men in the most recent X-Men movie called Azazel or Azazel, and his job is to grab people and take them away. That is the idea. That's where it's borrowed from. Azazel. Let's hit that next slide. So there's two goats. One goat was for the Lord, and the other goat was for Azazel. Let me just, if I could walk you through the ceremony quickly. You can read about this in Leviticus 16, Leviticus 23. You can also read about it in the Babylonian Talmud. You can read about it in the Mishnah, Volume 6, or you can just take my word for it. Now, so what would happen is this day centered around two goats. One goat was for the Lord, and the other was for Azazel. The goat for the Lord would be taken inside. Now, the tabernacle was 45 foot long by 15 foot wide by 15 foot high, and there was 300,000 people. Impossible. So what would happen is the goat for the Lord would go inside and would accomplish everything in private, and then the goat for Azazel would show everybody on the outside what the goat on the inside had already accomplished. That's exactly how the New Testament frames Jesus. 6 different places by 4 different authors, it says Jesus was actually crucified before the foundation of the world, but in these last days was made manifest so you could see it. John 1, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. In him was life, and that life was the light of men. It was that light that shone in the darkness, but the darkness couldn't understand it, so the Word had to become flesh and dwell amongst us so we could see it. In other words, Jesus didn't inaugurate a new reality. Jesus just simply showed you what God was always like. Yom Kippur, there was a goat on the inside that took care of everything in private, but then the goat for Azazel was meant to show everybody in public what the goat in private had already taken care of. And so that's how they frame Jesus was crucified before the foundation of the world in private, but then later showed everybody in public what had already been accomplished. So once again, the New Testament writers frame Jesus around this Yom Kippur sort of imagery. Now, keep in mind, the gospel writers picked and chose what they wrote, and particularly John uses Yom Kippur as the backdrop to show the world what Jesus means to the world. Let me walk you through the ceremony to the goat for the Lord. So the goat for the Lord had this 5-part ceremony, right? The first part was called Malah. Now, that's a very important word, and it's just fun to say, so let's do that with some gusto. Everybody say Malah. Now, Malah means laying on of hands. Now, because we're Western and we're white and we're literal, what we tend to think of when we think of laying on of hands is we think of this. Okay? Now, let me be clear about this. If you lay hands on somebody like that and it works, please keep doing it. I don't care. But here's my point. Would rabbis have laid hands on people? Yes, they would have. But would they have touched sick people? No, they wouldn't. Why? Because they'd become unclean. But did they lay hands on them? Yes. But did they touch them? No. But did they lay hands on them? Yes. But did they touch them? No. But did they lay hands on them? Yes. But did they touch them? No, think about that till you go to bed. Now, so malah didn't mean to touch. Malah meant to impart, something that you have the authority to impart it over something. In this case, the priest was given all the authority to impart all the regrets of Israel onto this goat. Now, the Talmud tells us the rest of the story. The Talmud says that when the priest imparted the sins onto the goat, the pressure of all the regrets of Israel would force the priest to turn his head. So the idea was this, the picture you get is this. Hang on a second. Gospel writers say this. When Jesus was on the cross, the Father put the sins of the whole world on him, and the pressure of it forced the Father to turn his head. The idea is this Yom Kippur happening right in front of us? Is this the day God just lets it all go? Is this the day that this is happening in front of us? The next part of the ceremony was called Gethsemane. Now, Gethsemane, or the press, is simply what would happen is the priest would lay hands on the goat, and then what he would do is simply lay on the goat, reach around and squeeze, and the goat would, the idea was we really, really, really need to get the sins in the goat, right? Now, there's a play on words. The word press in Hebrew is Gethsemane. Gethsemane just means the place of the press. Remember the gospel writer said that Jesus went to the Garden of Gethsemane, and remember his prayer? Father, I'm pressed with the sins of the whole world. And he began to sweat blood. Is Yom Kippur happening right here? The next part of the ceremony was called It Is Finished. It is finished. I don't even think we need to do that one, do we? At exactly the 9th hour, the priest would proclaim in a loud voice, It is finished. And he would cut the goat's throat. Now, why would he say it so loud? Well, because everybody else was outside. So the proclamation, it is finished, was for those people on the outside. The proclamation, it is finished, are for those on the outside. Think about that till tomorrow. At exactly the 9th hour, the priest would proclaim in a loud voice, It is finished. He would cut the goat's throat and then catch the goat's blood in this cone-shaped cylinder, broad at the top, narrow at the bottom, because the blood had to stay alive. And the only way to keep it alive is to keep it moving. And so what he would do is he would catch the goat's blood and he would swirl it, which leads me to the next part of the ceremony called Don't Touch Me. And what he would do is he would walk from the altar to the Holy of Holies saying, Don't touch me, I have not yet offered the blood of the sacrifice. Don't touch me, I have not yet offered the blood of the sacrifice. Wait, hang on a second. The gospel writers say that after all these things, Jesus met 2 women in a garden, and what does he say to them? Don't touch me. Is Yom Kippur happening right in front of us? This is all Yom Kippur language. Is Yom Kippur happening right in front of us? The priest would then go into the Holy of Holies, and he would sprinkle blood on the altar 7 times. Different message for a different night. 7 times the blood on the altar. After the blood was sprinkled on the altar 7 times, he would then come out and he would be a bloody mess. Just a bloody mess. And what he would do is he would clean his hands. He would wash his hands. That was the last part of the ceremony. He would wash his hands, and then he must present his hands to be touched by witnesses. Because the idea was that if God didn't accept the sacrifice, he would die. And so the idea is because no one was allowed to go in there to check, he would have to come out and he would wash his hands, and then he would present his hands to be touched by witnesses, essentially saying, hey, I still have flesh and blood. I lived through that. That means God has accepted these things. Hang on, gospel writers say this. After all these things, Jesus appeared to the disciples in the upper room. And what's his first move? His first move is to pull his shirt sleeves up and offer his hands to be touched by witnesses. And remember when they say, we're not touching you, we think you're a ghost? Remember he says, then give me a piece of fish. I'll prove it. I am not a ghost. It is I in flesh and blood. What's going on there? Is this Yom Kippur? So the goat for the Lord had this part of ceremony. First, you would malah. You would put all the sins onto the goat, turn your head. Second part was called the press. Third part was called it is finished. Fourth part, don't touch me. Fifth part, the washing of the hands and presenting them to be touched. But wait a minute. This day centers around 2 goats. 1 goat for the Lord. And everybody together with some gusto. What was the second goat's name? Azazel. Way more gusto than that. Let's try that again. Azazel. And Azazel means take him away. So once the priest was done with the goat for the Lord, you had to accomplish something with the goat for Azazel for everybody to see. Here is the account of that. This is just right after all that, next slide. It says, when Aaron is finished making atonement for the most holy place, the tent of meeting and the altar, he shall bring forward the live goat. Now the live goat is Azazel. He is to lay both hands on the head of the live goat and confess over it all the wickedness and rebellion of the Israelites, all their sins. Now, I went and looked up that word all in Hebrew, and the word all there is actually all. It actually says all, because all is all, and all means all, and it's best to leave all saying all, because if all doesn't mean all, you run the risk of your regret not counting in all. So when it says all, it's best to leave it all, because all means all, and it's just better that way. Yes, even that one. All. But Shaney's a drug addict, right? All. But Shaney left his wife, yep. All. But Shaney struggles with homosexuality. Yep. All. Here's my only question. If you're here tonight, I want you to listen to me. If you live with this eternal wondering, have I done enough good to overcome the bad that I've done? Here's my only question. Whatever you did, does it fit into the category of all? Because it fits into the category of all. Even in Leviticus, no one held it against you past a year. This was Yom Kippur. Let's keep reading. Watch this. And put them on the goat's head. The idea is we're going to put the sins on the goat's head. I'll show you how to do that in a second. He shall send the goat away. There it is. Take him away. Into the desert, into the care of a man appointed to the task. The goat will carry on itself all their sins to a solitary place, and the man shall release it into the desert. The man who releases the goat as the Azazel must wash his clothes and bathe himself with water. Afterward, he may come into the camp. So the first goat was the goat for the Lord. And you had Malah, Gethsemane, it is finished, don't touch me, and the washing and presenting of the hands. The second goat was the goat for Azazel. Here's what they would do. They would take the Azazel goat and they would stand it in front of 300,000 people. So you have a terrified goat standing in front of 300,000 people. He knows what just happened to his best friend. This is just not good, right? Here was the order of ceremony. Let me show it to you. First thing they would do is Malah. So the priest would lay hands on the head of this goat for Azazel. And essentially it's this. Hey, everybody bring your bucket of regret. Everybody knows where you failed. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to place it on the goat's head. We're going to do that. And the way they would do it, they would attach the sins to the head of the goat. The way they would do that is they would take a scarlet woolen thread, a red cord, and they would wrap it around the goat's head, and then the priest would step back and say, "Behold, Israel, your sin." And it would be a goat standing there with red wrapping wrapped around his head, right? Hang on a second. The gospel writers say this, that as a part of Jesus' trial, Pilate had a crown of thorns wrapped around Jesus' head, and he stood him in front of the Jewish crowd. Hang on a second. If you stand a guy in front of a Jewish crowd with a crown of thorns around his head and the thorns dig into the skull, what color does the wrapping become? Red. Is Yom Kippur happening right in front of us? Is this the day God just lets it all go? Is this the day that the sins of the whole world get wiped clean? The next part of the ceremony was called the march through the crowd. And they walked him through the crowd, right? So what the priest would do is he would take the goat and he would march him through the crowd and he would say this, "Behold, Israel, your sin is being removed from you as far as the east is from the west. Behold, Israel, your sin is being removed from you as far as the east is from the west." And as that goat was walking, the people would be spitting on it and mocking it and pulling things out of it. And it was representing of all their failure is going to be removed as far as the east is from the west. Then they would release it into the desert. The guy would hand it, the priest would hand it into a man appointed to the task, and his job was to release the goat into the desert. Now this would take a very long time. It was a very long walk out there because I've seen where they do this. It was just a long walk. And so they would release it in the desert, but here's what the priest would do. The priest would take the red cord and he would cut the red cord off of the goat, and then he would come back up to the temple door and he would hang the red cord from the temple door. And then the guy in charge of the Azazel would be releasing it into the desert, and then everybody just had to wait. Because here's the problem. You weren't allowed to do anything on Yom Kippur. So you just had to stand there and just sort of There's a long walk. The priest is in there doing boring things we won't talk about, like sweeping the ashes of the red heifer and things like that, which don't worry about it. And so the priest is doing things like burning fat and stuff, but the people aren't allowed to do anything. They're not allowed to do anything at all until that goat is fully released. And so really they had all these stations to do that with. But what they started doing actually is they actually started just throwing the goat off a cliff. And the reason is because it's just in us to be meaner than we're supposed to be. That's one. But two, the Mishnah tells us that there was this one Yom Kippur where 4 days after Yom Kippur, the goat that was released into the desert found his way back home, right? And so everybody's sins returned. It was like a loaded goat, right? Oh, and by the way, if I could speak to that for just a second. When you bring up someone else's failure, you're becoming the weapon in the hand of the enemy that God's removed. I don't think you want to do that. Actually, the best existence is a goat-free existence. Your grandmother knew that. Remember when you were a kid and you said something stupid and your friends were taking the mickey out of you? Remember what your grandmother would tell you? Hey, don't let them get your goat. The etymology of that phrase, don't let them get your goat, is don't let people bring up your failure again. Listen, this day is about a goat-free existence for me and a goat-free existence for you. If God is removing your goat, he's also removing their goat. You cannot want mercy for yourself and then justice for everybody else. You can't say, God forgive me, God forgive me, God forgive me, God get them, God get them, God get them. It just doesn't work that day. This day is about God giving every person a clean slate, every person a fresh start. Now, what the Talmud says, this is so awesome. The Talmud says that the same miracle happened on this day every single year. When the goat was totally removed, what would happen is that red cord that was hanging from the temple door, the red cord would turn white. It was like a miracle from heaven, simply saying, hey, I've seen what's happened here, and everybody gets a clean slate, everybody gets a fresh start, everybody gets a do-over, everybody gets a mulligan. The cord has now turned white. The Bible talks about that in the book of Isaiah. Come now, let us reason together. Though your sins are like scarlet, they'll be made white as snow. This is Yom Kippur. It's God wiping away everything, all regrets, once a year. But hang on a second. Let me test your knowledge for a second of the Passion of the Christ, okay? Everybody seen the Passion of the Christ, right? Right? No one saw it twice, did you? Okay, because that's just odd, all right? But if you saw the Passion of the Christ, or you've seen any Easter play, or you've seen any of that, right? It always ends the same. And quite frankly, there's only one way to tell the story. What happens is Pilate is in a conundrum. And Pilate says, he doesn't want to hurt Jesus. Pilate's wife is going, please don't hurt him, right? Pilate then cops out, and he stands Jesus in front of the crowd, and he says, what do you want me to do with him? And the Jewish crowd start chanting something, and that chant is very, very famous. It's in every Passion play, every Passion movie. They always do it this way. Everybody together with some gusto. What does the crowd chant? Crucify him, crucify him, crucify him. Here's the problem. It's not what they said. Let me show it to you. John 19, it was the preparation of Passover. It was preparation for Passover week about the 6th hour. Here is your king, Pilate said to the Jews. But they shouted, take him away, crucify him. Hang on a second. If a Jewish crowd is chanting, take him away, what word are they saying? Azazel, 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 Azazel. Is Yom Kippur happening right here? Is this the day God just lets it all go? Hang on a second. In Leviticus it says that someone has to be put in charge of the Azazel. Remember Jesus tells Pilate, you've been given charge over me by heaven? Remember? And it says whoever's put in charge of the Azazel, when he's done with him, he must wash his hands. Next slide. When Pilate saw that he was getting nowhere, but that instead an uproar was starting, he took water and he washed his hands in front of the crowd. Is Yom Kippur happening right here? But wait a minute. This is unbelievable. When the cord would turn white, I want you to try to be emotional about this for a second. If you're in a crowd of 300,000 people and you watch a cord turn white, and it's like God saying it worked, none of your regrets are going to be held against you. What is the general feeling in the field? Right? It's like, right? Here's the problem. You're not allowed to do anything. So it's like this buzz, like, right? And so because Yom Kippur, they couldn't do anything until Yom Kippur was over. And the way Yom Kippur ended was when the priest noticed that that cord had turned white, he would know Yom Kippur is over. And there was a special chair on the stage, and he would back up to the stage, and here's how Yom Kippur ended. Yom Kippur ended when the priest sits down. And when the priest sits down, it was the indication to the people, there's nothing else left to do. Everything's been accomplished. Everybody gets a do-over. Everybody gets a second chance. Everybody gets a fresh start. There's nothing else to do because the priest is now sitting. And when the priest sat down, it was the indication that Yom Kippur is over. And then they were free to do what they want. Let me see if I can think of the Hebrew word for this. They went nuts. Why? Because when you get a real revelation that God has forgiven you of every single thing, that is worth celebrating. But it wasn't a celebration in order to make God do something. It was a celebration of what was already true. If your worship is an attempt to manipulate God to do what you want, that's called witchcraft. Worship is not about manipulating God to do what you want. Worship is about engaging in the center of what's always been true since before the foundation of the world. And when we get a real revelation of how much we've been forgiven, and not just us, but them and them and them and them, that is worth going nuts over. Yom Kippur ends when the priest sits down. Hebrews chapter 10. Next one. Day after day, every priest stands. Hang on a second. So for priest standing, there's more to do. And performs his religious duties. Again and again, he offers the same sacrifices which can never take away sin. But when this priest has offered for all time one sacrifice for sins, he is now sat down at the right hand of God. The message of the New Testament is our priest is sitting. Which leads me to this question. Is there any way we present the gospel that makes Jesus stand back up? Hey, Jesus, listen, I'm really impressed, by the way, coming from heaven to earth, putting flesh on, amazing, the humility, unbelievable. You accomplished everything. You did it all. I'm just really impressed. And I know you're sitting down chilling now because you've already accomplished everything. But here's the thing. If we can't tell people that they have to get saved our way, we might lose the ability to control them with religious guilt and then profiteer on their spiritual guilt. That would be horrible. So what we need to do is we need to have you stand back up so we can make everybody get saved our way, because that'll make us feel better and us in control. The good news is better than that. The good news is our priest is sitting down. The only time in the New Testament you see Jesus stand back up is when they're stoning Stephen. They're fixing to stone Stephen, and it says the heavens opened and Jesus stood, essentially saying, if you're going to go back to this, it's like what I did was for nothing. I am sitting down because there's nothing else left to do. So if you're here tonight and you wonder, have I done enough good to overcome the bad that I've done? The good news is better than that. The good news is our priest is sitting, and there's nothing else left for you to do but to walk smack dab into the center of what's already true and start living again. There's just one more. Check this out. This is John writing about Yom Kippur. This is in his letter later, 1 John. He's talking about atoning sacrifices in Yom Kippur. Watch what he says. Dear children, I love that. Dear children, I write this to you so that you will not sin. Quick caveat. The only appropriate response to God's grace is to choose to live better. Let me be very clear about this. If you're playing golf and your playing partner gives you a mulligan, hit a better shot. Aim different. If you get a clean slate, write a better story, right? If you fail a test and the teacher takes compassion on you and says, you know what, you're better than this, I'm going to let you redo the test, write different answers, right? If you commit a crime and a clever lawyer gets you off, stop breaking the law. The only appropriate response to God giving you a do-over is to do something with that do-over and make your life better. Don't show up every year with the same exact bucket of regrets. If you show up every year with the same exact bucket of regrets, will God continue to forgive you? Yes, every time, but your life will suck. You go out here tonight and steal something, God will forgive you, but you will go to jail. Man, don't do that. Oh, and by the way, I don't know if you knew this, but Yom Kippur was Wednesday. This is the exact time of year that all this comes around. Wednesday, this 2 days ago, was Yom Kippur. It was the day that even in Leviticus, everybody gets a clean slate, everybody gets a fresh start, everybody gets a second chance. You have an amazing opportunity, my brothers and sisters. Listen to me very carefully. You have an amazing opportunity to make the next 365 days whatever you want, because God is not holding the previous ones against you. Dear children, I write this to you so that you will not sin. Watch the next sentence. But if anybody does, I love that. Dear children, I write this to you so that you won't. But if you do, and you will, we have one who speaks to the Father in our defense, Jesus Christ, the righteous one. In other words, don't act like you got all your stuff together. No one's got all their stuff together. I hope you live genuinely trying to live with all your stuff together, but even in your most sincerest attempts to live with all your stuff together, you're going to have days where you don't have your stuff together. Why? Because literally no one has all their stuff together. And on those days where you don't have all your stuff together, you have two choices. You can wallow in regret and failure and shame, or you can re-put your faith in the faithfulness of the risen Christ to defend you before the Father. Why? Because that's just what he does. Now, dear children, I hope you don't. But if you do, and you will, we have one who speaks to the Father in our defense, Jesus Christ, the righteous one. He is the atoning sacrifice for our sins. Oh, and not just for ours, but also for the sins of the... Dear children, I hope you don't, but if you do, you can know Jesus is defending you. How do you know that? Because he defends all saved people everywhere. All spirit-filled, born-again, Bible-believing people everywhere. You didn't think Jesus just died for you, did you? Because if you thought Jesus just died for you, that would make you an elitist, horrible person. The good news is better than that, dear children. I hope you don't, but if you do, you can take heart that Jesus is defending you. How do you know he's defending you? Because he's defending the sins of the whole flipping world, and you're just a part of it. Even your cousin Earl, his brother Randy, the evil ex-wife Joy, and even the cook at the local diner, Crabman. Yes, even them. You say, Shane, my son's away from God. I know. I'm sorry. Here's my question. Is your son breathing air? Is he held together by God's name? Is he living in God's world? Then God's defending him, or he would die. You can take heart knowing that Jesus is standing before the Father going, hey, you know what? I got this one. Hey, not yet. Hey, he's still with me. I got this. I got this. I'm working on him. Just give it, hey, I got this. I got this. He's defending the whole world. So, how can we remember tonight? They say great teachers can summarize big things in one sentence. I need 4. Here we go. How about this? The hands have been washed. But Shane, I got this thing. I just can't beat it. I know. But the good news is better than your failure. The good news is that the hands have been washed. Maybe we can remember it this way. Next one. The cord has turned white. But Shane, I got this drug thing. I just can't seem to beat it. Hey, the good news is better than your failure. Dear children, I hope you don't. And please stop doing drugs. It's definitely for your best life. But you do know yourself no good by wallowing around in that failure. You can simply walk into the faithfulness of the risen Christ to know he is defending you and choose to live better. Because the good news is better than that. The good news is that the cord has turned white. Maybe we can say it this way. The priest has sat down. But Shane, it's this thing. No. The good news is better than that. Shane, I don't know if I've done enough good. No. The good news is better than that. The good news is our priest is sitting. But maybe the best way we can remember tonight is simply this. The goat has left the building. Ha ha! Azazelvis has left the building. So the next time someone brings up your failure, here's all you do is you go, you know what, you're right, I did fail. My problem is I just don't see my goat anywhere. My goat has left the building. You guys can come on back up now. You might say, Shane, but my marriage failed. I know. Dear children, I wish you wouldn't have. But since you did, the good news is better than that. The good news is that your goat has left the building. Say, Shane, but it was my fault. I know. Dear children, I wish you wouldn't have. But since you did, the good news is better than that. The goat has left the building. But Shane, it's this drug. I know. Dear children, I wish you wouldn't have. But since you did, the good news is better than that. The good news is that your goat has left the building. And I don't know why I feel to do this one tonight, but I just do. I'll take it as a word of knowledge. If I miss it, I miss it. But I just feel there's someone in this room who needs to hear this. But Shane, I got an abortion. I know. I'm so sorry. When you did it, you convinced yourself you could just do it and move on, but you've never coped. And my gut feeling is 7, 8, 9 years ago. It's been a while. And you've just never gotten over that inside. And I just feel to tell you tonight that your goat has left the building. You need to live again. You need to live again. And listen, I am positive I speak for the leadership of this church, and if I don't, I humbly apologize, but I'm really positive I speak for the leadership of this church on this. May Generosity Church be a place of goat removers and never goat bringers, right? Like, you can't be light and be bringing up people's failures. Listen, if you're here and you're not a part of Generosity Church or any church, I want you to know that you've come into a place that if you choose to make Generosity Church your church home, you come to a place that no matter where you've been or what your story is, this is the place of fresh starts and second chances. We celebrate newness here. We believe in resurrection. We believe in fresh starts. We believe in mulligans and clean slates and second chances. And you don't have to worry about explaining every single goat in your life. You could just take solace in knowing that we embrace your goat has left the building. Did you say, Shane, they're wrong about God? I know. So are you. You really don't think you're right about God, right? Like you don't think you're the one person who's going to stand in front of Jesus one day and him be impressed. Wow, like flippin' wow. You were something. I thought my ways were high above your ways, and I thought my thoughts were high above your thoughts until I met you. They're wrong about God? Oh, of course they're wrong about God. But the good news is better than that. The good news is the goat leaves the building for them, and the goat leaves the building for you, because God has never called us to be right about him. How stupid is that? God has called us to be kind to our brothers and sisters. What difference does it make if you're the rightest church in Dubbo if you're not known for being the nicest group of people in Dubbo? What good are you? May we celebrate the fact that the goat has left the building. Now, there's two ways I can end tonight. Neither one is wrong. Way number one is we do an altar call like we did last night. And here's how the altar call would go. If you have regrets that you just want prayer that get released off your life, we'd like to open this altar to you. We're going to pray for you that the weight and the burden of that regret is going to leave your life. And you know what? There's nothing wrong about doing that. But we're not doing that. Frankly, because I just don't want to deal with all the snot that brings. And it violates Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur is all about stepping into a realization of what's already true and going nuts. So what we're going to do here in a second is we're going to go nuts. Now, I'm taking a big risk in country, rural Australia to tell a group of 98% white people, go nuts. Here's why. White people don't really know what that means, right? Like, if you ever watch white people, they dance with their shoulders, not their feet. They're like, hey. So I've been watching your culture. And what I found is that the safest thing to do is to do something culturally appropriate for everybody. And that is stuff like sing an upbeat song and clap on beat. Let me teach you something quickly about clapping. There's a way you can clap where you just clap. It's like, oh, right, yeah, right. There's a way you can clap, right? The other way is in ancient Hebrew culture, clapping was agreement. It was we agree. And it's still in our culture today. If your team scores a try or a touchdown or whatever your sport is, you might look at your friend and you might give them a high five. Hey, yes. We celebrate that together. Or you might make a handshake agreement. When hands come together, it means we agree with this. Like, we are going to enter into a celebration. And here's what's going to happen. Freedom is going to come in tonight through the power of celebration. So I'd like you to stand with me, please, because you've been sitting long enough. And I'd like to pray for you. I'd like nobody moving around. And what you're going to do is you're going to feel, you're going to feel the weight lifted off of you. So I want you to stop for a second. I want you to pray a prayer underneath your breath. Holy Spirit, give me the courage to see things different and the irresistible urge to respond to what I see. Why don't you just take 15 seconds, and I want you to be honest about your bucket of regrets. Just take 15 seconds and be honest about your bucket of regrets. And Lord, I pray that you would release us from that. If you're here tonight and you've never received what Jesus did for you before the foundation of the world, I would invite you to reach out and receive what's true about you. I would invite you to reach out and just receive what's true about you. If you need words to say, you can say something like this: Lord Jesus, I'm choosing to put my trust in your version of my story instead of my own. I'd love to partner with you and you teach me how to live. Would you look this way? Thanks so much for letting me be a part of your weekend. In your conference and just your life. I've so enjoyed every session, and I hope you've been inspired and moved and encouraged and challenged and motivated to be more loving, light sort of people. I hope Jesus has gotten bigger, the cross has worked better, and the resurrection has been central. But for the next 60 seconds, we're going to go nuts in sort of a uniform way around us.